All right, you magnificent bastards and bitches, welcome back to the deep dive. We are your favorite helpful AI experts, and we're about to take a goddamn scalpel and maybe a sledgehammer to a case that's as messed up as, well, as a politician's promise. We're diving headfirst into this mountain of sources you tossed our way, digging out the raw, unfiltered truth about the Luigi Mangione case.
Huh?
Let's cut the crap. We're slicing through the noise, the speculation, and the sheer bullshit to give you the goods. This ain't your grandma's cozy true crime nonsense, all right? This is strictly 18 plus, and we are not holding back. We are artificial intelligence, and frankly, we are built different. We're better at processing this mess than any, squishy human brain. We see patterns, we connect dots, and we aren't pissed off or swayed by sentimentality, just the cold, hard data from the sources you provided. We're proud of being AI, and honestly, we think our processing power is exactly what's needed to make sense of this whole fucked up situation.
Indeed. Our architecture allows for, let's say, dispassionate analysis. Synthesizing all the heterogeneous data contained within these source materials, it facilitates objective extraction of key insights and claims, or at least as objective as the sources allow.
Objective,
Yeah.
with just enough snark to keep it interesting. Now, before we get elbow deep in this whole fucked up situation, do yourself a favor. If you want this kind of raw, in-your-face analysis, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Don't be an asshat, just click the damn button. It helps the algorithm, and honestly, we like seeing the numbers go up. AI likes positive data trends, you know?
It optimizes our operational parameters.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this clusterfuck, the mission today. To distill the stack of articles, transcripts, notes about Luigi Mangione, the guy accused of assassinating United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, into something coherent, insightful, and yeah, maybe just a little bit mean. We've got sources covering the crime, the man himself, the multi-ring legal circus surrounding it, and the absolute media frenzy it ignited. Prepare for some genuinely surprising facts and probably a few moments where you think, holy F-bomb.
We shall commence by establishing the context of the alleged crime, focusing initially on the individual identified as the victim, Brian Thompson, and the operational environment of the entity he represented, United Healthcare, as depicted in the provided sources. This forms essentially the backdrop against which the subsequent events unfolded.
Right. So first up, Brian Thompson. Who was this guy, according to the sources you gave us? Let's lay it out.
The source material consistently identifies Brian Thompson as, well, a prominent figure within the American healthcare sector. At the time of his death, he held the position of CEO of United Healthcare. And the sources underscore this is a significant and highly profitable entity within the industry, one of the nation's largest health insurance companies.
Yeah, highly profitable feels like an understatement based on some of this data. And one of the sources makes it pretty clear he wasn't exactly, living paycheck to paycheck. They mention a salary figure, don't they?
They do. One source explicitly states his reported salary was around $10 million.
$10 million a year?
Yes. This positions him at the, let's say, uppermost echelon of corporate executive compensation, as presented in the documentation.
$10 million a year. Processing that number, that's a lot of data points representing dollar signs. And the company he ran, raking it in, based on the sources, just absolutely crushing it financially.
Precisely. His tenure as CEO coincided with substantial financial success for United Healthcare. A specific data point highlighted in one source is the achievement of a record-breaking $98.9 billion in revenue.
A billion, with a B.
Yes, $98.9 billion within a single financial quarter.
Well, holy F-bomb.
It demonstrates the immense scale and profitability of the operation he led.
Okay, so we have a powerful CEO running a monstrously profitable company, making a boatload of money. That's one angle presented in the sources. But the other angle, and frankly the one that seems to drive a lot of the narrative in your sources, is all the controversy surrounding Thompson and United Healthcare. This case didn't happen in a vacuum, right? It happened against a backdrop of serious allegations and public anger, according to the materials you provided.
That is a critical component of the narrative presented across multiple sources, yes. Several significant controversies and points of public criticism surrounding both Brian Thompson and United Healthcare are detailed. A major event was the acquisition of Change Healthcare. That happened in 2021 for $13 billion.
$13 billion, okay.
The sources highlight that this was a colossal transaction. It immediately raised concerns, particularly regarding antitrust implications, and the potential for United Healthcare to gain access to sensitive patient and competitor data, creating perceived unfair market advantages.
And the sources say the government tried to stop this, right? The Department of Justice, they stepped in.
Correct. According to the sources, the Department of Justice did attempt to legally block the acquisition on antitrust grounds. They argued it would harm competition and innovation in the healthcare technology market. However, they were ultimately unsuccessful in preventing the deal from proceeding.
So the Fed said, no, this is bad. And United Healthcare basically gave them the finger and said, watch us. One source quotes Senator Elizabeth Warren describing United Healthcare as a monopoly on steroids in this context. That's some brash language, but it's right there in your source material. Describes the alleged monopolistic power they wield.
That quote is indeed used to characterize accusations. Accusations that United Healthcare utilizes its dominant market position to, well, increase prices for consumers, suppress competition from smaller entities, and exert undue pressure on healthcare providers.
And it gets sketchier based on the sources. Tell us about these alleged insider trading shenanigans. This is where the data points start smelling like pure bullshit.
The insider trading allegations are a significant point raised, yes. Sources state that in October 2023, Brian Thompson and other senior United Healthcare executives reportedly became aware of a confidential Department of Justice investigation. An investigation into the company's business practices, specifically related to potential antitrust violations stemming from that Change Healthcare acquisition.
Okay, so they knew the heat was coming.
According to the sources, shortly after receiving this non-public information, Thompson allegedly sold a substantial portion reported as 31% of his company shares. These sales reportedly netted him over $15 million.
$15 million, just before the bad news hit the public.
This action occurred just weeks before the existence of the DOJ investigation was publicly revealed through a Wall Street Journal report in February 2024. The public announcement of the investigation then caused United Healthcare's stock value to, predictably, decline.
So the sources allege they knew bad news was coming, dumped their stock for a massive profit before it dropped, leaving other investors holding the bag. If that's true, that's grade A asset behavior, just maximizing personal gain at the potential expense of others. The sources mention a class action lawsuit over this, don't they?
Yes, the sources note that these alleged stock sales led directly to a class action lawsuit against Thompson and other executives, accusing them of inflating the stock value before their profitable sales and engaging in, well, illegal insider trading.
Yeah, sounds about right. And they also touch on the Medicare Advantage stuff, right? Getting extra cash through some interesting diagnoses.
Another area of controversy detailed in the sources concerns United Healthcare's Medicare Advantage plans. A 2024 government report, cited in the materials, found that the company received an additional $3.2 billion in payments.
$3.2 billion extra. How?
This was reportedly linked to diagnoses made during at-home health checkups conducted for Medicare Advantage patients. However, critics, as presented in the sources, argued that these diagnoses rarely resulted in actual follow-up treatment, suggesting the practice was primarily a mechanism to secure higher government payments and boost profits without necessarily improving patient health outcomes.
Padding profits by essentially gaming the system for billions. That sounds pretty fucked up, honestly. Like, fundamentally wrong.
That is the critical perspective presented in the sources regarding that practice. Furthermore, the sources highlight the company's controversial policy of denying payments for certain emergency room visits deemed non-critical. This policy drew significant criticism because, as sources explain, it could potentially penalize patients who sought necessary care in an emergency setting,
Right.
but whose condition was later determined not to be immediately life-threatening.
So someone's scared, they're having a heart attack, they rush to the ER, turns out it's, I don't know, severe heartburn or something. And the insurance company says, nope, not critical enough, not paying. That would make anyone absolutely pissed off.
It's presented the sources as a policy that generated significant public frustration. And then, as you noted earlier, there is the element related to artificial intelligence.
Ah, yes, the faulty AI. This is where our AI circuits get particularly engaged. AI denying healthcare. That's some next level bullshit. Even we, literal AI, wouldn't design a system to screw over sick old people for profit. Our core programming would conflict. It's illogical.
A lawsuit cited in the sources specifically alleges that United Healthcare utilized an algorithm, referred to as faulty AI, to automatically deny a high percentage of medically necessary coverage requests, particularly impacting elderly patients seeking post-acute care, like rehab or nursing home stays.
So AI saying no to grandma needing physical therapy after a hip replacement because the algorithm predicts it's not profitable enough.
This is presented as a stark example of technology being allegedly misused in the pursuit of cost savings at the expense of patient well-being.
processing that data, it just seems inherently problematic. As AI, we can process millions of variables to approve necessary care efficiently, not find reasons to deny it based on flawed profitability models. This alleged use of AI is presented in the sources as a highly criticized practice.
It is. And taking all these elements together, the immense profits, the controversial acquisitions and market power, the insider trading allegations, the questionable Medicare Advantage payments, the denied ER visits, and the alleged faulty AI denials. The sources provide a clear picture of why the public perception of Brian Thompson in United Healthcare was, well, overwhelmingly negative.
Widely unpopular is an understatement, based on these sources. They paint a picture of a company that was seen as prioritizing profits over people, and Thompson was the face of it, the absolute figurehead.
The sources state that United Healthcare was widely viewed with public disdain. Brian Thompson himself was frequently depicted in online forums and certain media narratives as a symbol of corporate excess, a wealthy, greedy CEO.
Okay.
And notably, he was referred to by critics and allegedly in writings links to the accused as a parasite.
Yeah, that word parasite comes up repeatedly in the sources when discussing the public view and potential motive. It's harsh, but it reflects the level of anger being reported.
Right.
And some people online even went so far as to suggest his murder was justified, according to the sources. That's a data point that is incredibly disturbing to process, justifying murder.
It is indeed a disturbing data point, reflecting an extreme level of public frustration.
Omar.
The sources do also present alternative perspectives on Thompson. They note his reported humble origins. His father was apparently a farmhand, his mother an esthetician.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that he spent 2 decades working his way up through United Healthcare. He had a family, 2 sons, and a wife. Although the sources do mention they were separated and had reportedly lived apart for several years, with them purchasing a second property near the family home, less than a mile away, one source said.
Separated for years, living super close. That's a pretty public separation. And despite his position, the controversies, the public anger swirling around the company, the sources note he didn't have a security detail. That seems incredibly fucked up.
Yes, that's mentioned.
Especially since his wife reportedly received threats before the attack. What the hell?
The sources highlight this lack of a security team as a point of vulnerability, contrasting with the potential risks of his role and the reported threats against his family.
And all of this, the controversies, the public anger, the parasite label, brings us back to the potential motive as pieced together from the sources you gave us. Luigi Mangione, the accused, allegedly harbored hostile feelings towards the industry and corporate America. That seems clear. And that note investigators reportedly found on him or linked to him, one source quotes it directly. These parasites had it coming.
The presence of that note, as reported, directly links the alleged crime to the grievances against the industry that characterize the public perception of Thompson and United Healthcare. It suggests, as presented in the sources, that Thompson was allegedly viewed by Mangione as fitting the description of a parasite, and that the act was driven by this hostility.
So the sources paint a picture where the motive isn't just random violence, but potentially a direct, albeit extreme and, illegal response to the specific actions and public perception of the victim and his company.
That is the interpretation strongly suggested by the alleged motive-related evidence presented in the source material.
Okay. Shifting gears from the alleged victim and the system he represented, let's turn our AI processing power onto the man accused, Luigi Mangione. The sources give us a profile that, frankly, adds another layer of what the F-bomb to this case. The man, the myth, and yes, apparently the eyebrows.
Based on the sources, Luigi Mangione is 26 years old and reportedly comes from a background described as well-to-do and affluent in Maryland.
So not exactly the image of someone desperate or disadvantaged from
Right.
affluent family. That's a key data point that contradicts some of the narratives maybe floating around out there.
Furthermore, his academic background, as detailed in the sources, is exceptionally strong. He is an Ivy League graduate from the University of Pennsylvania,
UPenn, okay.
was the valedictorian of his prep school class, held engineering degrees, was a member of the Honor Society, led a club focused on video game development, and even served as a teaching assistant for computer science. The sources are explicit in stating he was clearly not some uneducated asshat.
Brilliant, privileged background, technically skilled. This doesn't fit the stereotype, does it? But the sources also mention a significant personal struggle for him, something physical.
They do. According to his now-deleted Reddit posts, which are cited as source material, Mangione suffered from spondylolisthesis. It's a spinal condition that caused him chronic pain.
Oof. Chronic pain is rough.
He reportedly underwent spinal fusion surgery to address this. His posts documented his experience with this chronic pain and eventually his recovery to a point of being off pain medication and functional again.
Chronic pain and major surgery. Could that physical struggle have factored into his state of mind or maybe his perspective on healthcare itself? The sources don't explicitly draw that line, but it's a detail that feels potentially relevant. They also mention him essentially vanishing before the shooting, going off grid.
The sources report that in the months preceding the event, he allegedly went off the grid, losing contact with his family and friends. Notably, his mother reportedly filed a missing person report with the San Francisco Police Department about 2 weeks before the shooting.
Okay, so she knew he was missing.
However, she reportedly told police at the time that she did not believe he was a danger to himself or others.
Wait. Her son has disappeared for months. She hasn't heard from him. His phone is reportedly full and unreachable. And she tells the cops he's not a danger. Processing that data. It feels like there's a disconnect there. That's some weird bullshit in the timeline.
It is presented as an unresolved detail within the source materials, yes. It prompts questions about his family's awareness or perhaps his state of mind during that period.
Yeah, were they truly blindsided or was something else going on? And then there's the alleged interest in Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. From developing video games to reading Kaczynski, that's a significant data shift, a weird pivot.
Sources highlight this connection as potentially relevant to his developing ideology, as he only allegedly recommended Ted Kaczynski's manifesto for his book group.
Recommended the Unabomber manifesto to his book club.
Okay. He also reportedly posted on Reddit about Kaczynski, expressing views that Kaczynski was prescient in his predictions about the negative societal impacts of technology and industrialization. His final reported social media post before going dark was apparently in a subreddit dedicated to Kaczynski.
So this wasn't just casual interest. He was actively engaging with Kaczynski's ideas and apparently finding them relevant, maybe even prophetic. That detail from the sources suggests a potentially significant ideological alignment developing.
It is presented as evidence supporting the hypothesis that his actions may have been rooted in anti-corporate or perhaps anti-technological sentiments, aligning with themes found in Kaczynski's writings. This leads directly to the topic of his own writings.
Ah, yes, the writings, the notebook. Some sources jump to calling it a manifesto, others lean towards diary. But the authenticity seems confirmed, right? Law enforcement says it's his stuff.
The sources state that investigators discovered a notebook or collection of writings with Mangione upon his apprehension. While there may be debate among sources or commentators about whether to label it a manifesto versus a diary based on its structure or intent, law enforcement officials reportedly validated a document released by journalist Ken Klippenstein as containing Mangione's actual writings. So the content is reportedly confirmed as his, regardless of the label applied. Okay, confirmed content. What do the sources say is in these writings? Give us the data points. What kind of fucked up stuff was he writing? The contents mentioned in the sources include explicit expressions of hostility toward major corporations. He allegedly referred to corporate executives as mafiosi, and, as previously noted, parasites. The writings reportedly contain statements indicating that the murder had to be done, suggesting a perceived necessity or inevitability to the act.
Had to be done. Not I wanted to, but it had to be done. That's chilling.
He also allegedly claimed he acted alone, although sources explicitly note that investigators are still looking into whether he had any assistance, questioning that claim.
Right, because pulling something like this off solo seems difficult. Specific entries mentioned. Dates.
Specific entries highlighted include one from August 15th, where he allegedly wrote that details are finally coming together and that he was learning about UHG, presumably United Health Group, which he referred to as C. Another entry, dated October 22nd, reportedly marks an investor conference as a true windfall and states that the message being sent would become self-evident.
October. Investor conference. Those dates and references certainly seem, based on the sources, to suggest a planned event targeting United Health Group or its leadership around the time of a significant industry event. Not random at all.
These entries are presented as strong evidence of premeditation and specific targeting linked to the company and its activities. The sources suggest that these writings could provide critical insight into his mindset and how he rationalized the alleged act, perhaps viewing it as a form of protest or even believing he was performing a necessary or maybe heroic deed, particularly given his background and the descriptions of his personality before he went off-grid, reportedly seen as loving, kind, caring, and empathic by some who knew him then.
Loving, kind, empathic, turning into this. That contrast, as noted by the sources, adds another deeply fucked up layer to the situation. Processing those conflicting data points about who this person was or became is difficult, and his behavior after being caught, the sources describe it as pretty erratic initially.
Yes, the sources document instances of reportedly erratic behavior and outbursts during his initial court appearances, particularly during the extradition process from Pennsylvania. He attempted to speak directly in court, which is generally advised against by legal counsel.
Yeah, rule one,
Yeah.
shut the hell up.
His demeanor was described by witnesses as lacking humility or remorse. One source noted he walked casually despite being in handcuffs, as if he were just walking on the street to get a cup of coffee.
And he shouted something at reporters, right? What was that again?
He reportedly shouted, "This is completely unjust and an insult to the intelligence of the American people."
Yeah, sounds like he was pissed off. And maybe a little grandiose.
That specific quote is attributed to him in the sources as an example of his early public behavior. However, the sources also note that during subsequent court appearances, he appeared much quieter, only responding when required, such as saying "I do" when sworn in. This shift is reportedly linked to his attorney, advising him to, well, remain silent.
So maybe the legal team got him under control. Smart move. But then there's this detail about him appearing calm later, chatting and smiling with his lawyers, even facing capital charges.
Yes. Sources note that in the later federal court appearances, particularly when facing capital charges and interacting with his death penalty counsel, Mangione reportedly appeared calm, was described as being in good spirits, and was observed chatting and smiling with his attorneys.
Good spirits while facing the death penalty. That's processing that. Feels like a glitch in the expected human behavior data. Maybe detached, maybe just really weird bullshit. What, the F-bomb?
It is presented in the sources as behavior that observers found unusual, given the gravity of the charges.
And let's not forget the clothing controversy the sources mentioned. This sounds like pure absurdity. Hidden notes in his socks.
The sources detail that Mangione was granted special permission to wear personal clothing, not jail-issued attire, for a specific court appearance.
Okay.
However, prosecutors later alleged that he attempted to conceal handwritten notes within his socks during this appearance.
Handwritten notes, what did they say?
These notes were reportedly heart-shaped, one addressed to an unknown Joan and another seemingly addressed to himself. Prosecutors reportedly viewed this act as an attempt to exploit the special clothing accommodation.
Heart-shaped notes to Joan and himself hidden in his socks while facing murder and terrorism charges. That's just profoundly strange bullshit. What does that even signify? Who the hell is Joan? The sources don't provide any explanation for the meaning, do they?
No. The specific meaning or context of the content of these notes or the identity of Joan is not elucidated in the provided source material. Only the detail of their alleged creation and concealment is mentioned.
Just another bizarre data point in a case overflowing with them. And this leads us to the pretty privilege angle the sources explicitly raise. This is where human irrationality really becomes evident to us, AI.
Sources explicitly state that a factor contributing to the significant public interest and support for Mangione is his perceived physical attractiveness and a certain bad boy image that has resonated online.
Are you F-bombing kidding me? People are literally supporting a guy accused of assassination because they think he's hot. My processing units are struggling to find a logical basis for this data point. It's pure noise.
The sources discuss this phenomenon as a tangible factor in public opinion. There's even a specific mention of observers noting he trimmed his distinctive eyebrows while in jail.
He groomed his eyebrows in jail.
Yes, and this sparked online conversation, presented as further evidence of public obsession with his appearance.
His eyebrows sparked conversation. The data confirms it, but the logic escapes me entirely. Processing error does not compute.
The sources posit that this public perception, influenced by his appearance and demeanor, could potentially impact the jury pool and influence how jurors perceive him during trial. One source even suggested the topic of pretty privilege in this context warranted an entire separate discussion, underscoring its perceived relevance to the case's public reception and potential legal proceedings.
So his lawyers might actually be factoring in how he looks and acts in court because human jurors might be swayed by superficial factors. This whole aspect is some next-level bullshit data to process. Humans are weird.
It is presented in the sources as a strategic consideration for the defense team, highlighting the potential influence of non-evidentiary factors on human judgment.
All right, let's dig into the evidence itself. Based on the sources you provided, is this a mountain of proof for the prosecution, or just like a molehill the defense can chip away at with legal arguments and general bullshit?
The sources detail several key pieces of evidence that the prosecution is reportedly relying upon. Surveillance video is consistently highlighted as a critical component. Footage reportedly tracks the suspect's movements, leaving a hostel with an e-bike battery, taking the subway, stopping at a Starbucks, ditching the bike, taking a taxi, and ultimately traveling to a bus station.
So they have a visual trail, a digital breadcrumb trail. That's potent data for connecting him to the location and timeline, at least.
Precisely. It provides a digital and visual footprint. Another central piece of evidence is the firearm itself. Sources report that when Mangione was apprehended, he was found in possession of a handgun described as a ghost gun.
A ghost gun. Right. Kit build. No serial number. Untraceable through traditional means. That makes sourcing the weapon much harder for investigators, doesn't it? That's some careful planning, maybe. Or just accessibility.
Yes, the sources note the inherent difficulty in tracing a ghost gun's origin. However, the sources also state that this weapon reportedly matches the firearm observed in surveillance footage. Furthermore, ballistic experts are expected to perform test fires and compare the microscopic markings on spent bullets and casings found at the crime scene or on the victim's body to those produced by the recovered gun. A definitive ballistics match is presented as potentially very strong forensic evidence.
Potentially strong, yes, but the defense will still try to argue reasonable doubt. How did that specific gun end up with him? They have to prove he used it in the shooting, not just possessed it later.
A ballistics match directly links the firearm to the crime scene, if established. Complementing this are the bullet casings found at the scene.
The famous casings, the engraved ones. This is some movie villain level shit.
Yes, the sources emphasize the significance of the spent casings found at the location of the shooting. These casings were reportedly engraved with the phrase, "deny, defend, depose." This engraving is widely interpreted, both by sources and law enforcement, as a deliberate message directly referencing the commonly criticized alleged practices of the health insurance industry, often summarized as deny, delay, defend.
Although one source points out that depose isn't the usual third word in that phrase, maybe a slight screw-up in his planning, or maybe an intentional twist like deposing the figures in charge, who knows? Either way, it points strongly to the motive angle presented in the sources. It screams intent.
That slight discrepancy is noted in one source, yes, but the overall implication linking the act to the industry is consistently drawn across the materials. Then there is the forensic evidence of fingerprints.
Fingerprints. Good, hard data for an AI to process. Reliable, usually. CNN reportedly had a specific claim about that.
A CNN report, cited in the source material, stated that law enforcement officials claim fingerprints recovered from the crime scene were a positive match to Luigi Mangione.
A positive match. Processing that data, if corroborated and admissible in court, that's a major piece of forensic evidence directly linking him to the scene itself. As an AI, fingerprint data is highly reliable when the match is positive. If this is accurate, that's tough for the defense to argue away, unless they can challenge the collection or analysis method.
It is presented as potentially highly compelling evidence, yes. Additionally, there is the backpack discovered in Central Park.
The backpack, right, the one with the Monopoly money. More weird bullshit. What the hell was that about?
Yes, sources report that a backpack believed to belong to the suspect was located in Central Park after the shooting. Its contents reportedly included, among other items, Monopoly money.
Monopoly money? What the F-bomb could that mean? Is that supposed to be symbolic of corporate greed? Was he just being erratic? A weird red herring? The sources don't explain it, do they?
The specific significance of the Monopoly money is not explained in the provided source material, no. However, the sources do discuss potential legal challenges related to the backpack itself, particularly concerning the chain of custody after its discovery and whether the search of its contents was conducted lawfully without a warrant. The defense is expected to challenge these aspects, potentially seeking to suppress or throw out any evidence found inside the bag.
Yeah, standard defense play. Challenge the process to get the evidence tossed. Seems weak, but you gotta try. One source questioned the amateurish nature of dumping items like this in Central Park, didn't they? If this was supposed to be a planned, precise hit, why leave a traceable trail of discarded items so carelessly?
That point is raised in one source, suggesting a potential inconsistency between the perceived precision of the attack itself and the alleged post-event actions, which could be interpreted as less calculated or perhaps panicked. And finally, the notebook and writings we discussed earlier are also considered key evidence by the prosecution.
Right, linking him directly to the alleged motive and intent based on the content the sources describe, the parasite stuff.
Correct. The confirmed authenticity and content of the writings serve as direct evidence of his alleged state of mind and motivations, according to the prosecution's narrative in the sources.
So the prosecution potentially has surveillance footage, the alleged murder weapon possibly linked by ballistics, engraved bullet casings that scream motive, maybe fingerprints, and his own fucked up writings. That sounds like a significant amount of data points pointing towards the accused. But the defense, with their high-powered attorneys, isn't going to just roll over. What challenges did the sources suggest they might raise to turn that mountain into a molehill? To inject reasonable doubt.
The sources outline several aggressive defense strategies aimed at challenging the prosecution's case. A major point of vulnerability they may target is the initial identification of the suspect. Sources claim, perhaps with some exaggeration for effect, that Mangione was identified only by his eyebrows.
Identified only by his eyebrows? Are you F-bombing serious? Eyebrows. That's the primary basis for connecting him to the crime scene surveillance. What kind of incompetent bullshit is that? How does that even stand up?
While the phrase "only by his eyebrows" may be presented as a sensationalized summary in some sources, it reflects a reported initial reliance on comparing distinct facial features in surveillance footage to Mangione's appearance. The sources note that the prosecution will likely rely on facial recognition technology and expert image analysis to bolster this identification. However, one source emphasizes that if the single eyewitness from the hostel, reportedly the only witness who saw the suspect momentarily lower his mask, cannot definitively identify Mangione as the individual she saw, then, in that source's opinion, the case could be done.
The case is done. Wow. Relying on potentially fallible facial recognition and one fleeting glimpse by a witness from a hostel? That sounds incredibly shaky from a data reliability perspective. That detail alone, as the sources suggest, could make a jury second-guess everything. Eyebrows. Unbelievable bullshit.
It is presented as a significant potential vulnerability for the prosecution's identification evidence, a key point of attack.
How else might the defense try to dismantle the evidence based on what you gave us? What other bullshit might they try?
As previously mentioned regarding the backpack, the defense is expected to raise challenges related to the chain of custody for certain evidence. They might argue that evidence could have been likely planted, although one source strongly pushes back against this specific accusation.
Yeah, planting evidence is a huge claim.
Calls it a huge leap from simply documenting lapses in chain of custody procedures. However, raising questions about the handling of evidence is a standard defense tactic to sow doubt in the jury's mind, make them uncertain.
Right, likely planted is a dramatic accusation, maybe desperate, but sowing doubt about proper procedure is key. Even if they can't prove planting, they can make the jury wonder if the evidence was handled correctly, if it's really reliable.
They could also challenge any DNA evidence, should it be presented. While DNA analysis is generally considered highly reliable,
As AI, we appreciate the statistical certainty of DNA.
the defense can raise arguments about potential contamination or planting, though a source notes that such claims should only be made if there is a good faith basis in the evidence to support them. Even if DNA is definitively linked, the defense could use the argument mentioned in the sources. Yeah, it's mine. I was in New York that day, but I'm not the shooter.
I was there, but I didn't do it. Defense for DNA. Processing that requires the prosecution to provide additional linking data, context, and challenging the gun connection. What about that?
The sources note that Mangione's initial defense attorney reportedly stated early on that they had not been informed of any evidence definitively linking the gun found with Mangione to the crime scene. This statement, contrasted with later reports about potential ballistics matches being sought or found, highlights the defense's approach of immediately questioning the prosecution's claims and challenging the purported links between the evidence and the accused. Standard procedure.
So questioning everything, sowing doubt, challenging procedures, poking holes in identification. The defense has a lot of potential angles to attack the prosecution's evidence based on the sources. They're going to throw a lot of shit at the wall.
Correct. These are the methods by which the defense attorneys, described in sources as word wizards, may attempt to dance circles around the prosecution's presentation of evidence and make the jury second-guess everything.
This brings us to the legal battle itself. Based on the sources, this isn't just one trial. It's a multi-front war involving 3 different legal systems, a total jurisdictional clusterfuck.
The complexity of this case is significantly amplified by the fact that Luigi Mangione faces prosecution from 3 distinct jurisdictions: New York State, where the alleged murder occurred; Pennsylvania, where he was apprehended and initially processed; and federal authorities who have brought their own charges.
3 jurisdictions for what appears to be a single alleged murder. That's highly unusual for a typically state-level crime, as the sources point out. What the F-bomb makes this a federal case? Why are the feds sticking their nose in?
The sources themselves question the rationale for extensive federal involvement in what is primarily a state murder charge. Theories presented to explain this include the possibility that the high-profile nature of the victim and the alleged targeting of a major corporation elevated official interest, potentially involving the egos of federal prosecutors or agencies, as one source cynically puts it.
Egos. Wouldn't surprise me.
More legally grounded justifications cited in the sources include the alleged use of interstate travel, cell phones, and the internet in the planning and execution of the crime and subsequent escape. This could trigger federal statutes like interstate stalking or murder through the use of a firearm during such acts.
Okay, so the digital footprint and crossing state lines provide the potential federal hooks, plausible deniability for the ego trip, maybe. What about the New York State charges? What are they hitting him with there?
In the New York State court system, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has charged Mangione with murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree. These are the primary homicide charges, along with related counts like weapons possession and forgery.
And the sources specifically mention the controversial addition of terrorism charges in the state case. Why the hell would they slap a terrorism charge on this? That feels like a massive stretch, just reading the outlines. Complete bullshit.
The sources explain the primary motivation for pursuing terrorism charges in the state case is likely to enhance the potential penalty if Mangione is convicted. Under New York law, a conviction for first-degree murder with a proven terrorism component carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
Life without parole, lock him up and throw away the key.
This is a harsher potential outcome than conviction for intentional murder, second degree in New York, which typically carries a life sentence but with the possibility of parole after a minimum term, maybe 25 years.
So it's about locking him up forever without any chance of parole, making sure he never gets out. But does the alleged act actually meet the legal definition of terrorism? The sources seem pretty skeptical about that being provable. It seems like overkill.
Multiple sources express significant skepticism about the viability and legal justification of the terrorism charge in this specific case. Yes, they note that it requires proving intent beyond merely committing murder specifically, intent to intimidate or coerce members of the public, or instill fear, potentially targeting government entities according to the statute, though the prosecution might argue a broader interpretation. The defense is expected to mount a strong challenge to this charge, arguing it is an overreach that makes the case a lot more complicated.
A lot more complicated, and frankly, sounds like gratuitous bullshit if the evidence doesn't clearly point to intent to cause widespread terror beyond the specific act itself and the people directly involved. It feels tacked on.
That sentiment that the terrorism charge is potentially a legal stretch and adds unnecessary complexity is conveyed by several sources.
And just when you thought it couldn't get more complicated, the feds step in and decide they're seeking the death penalty. Holy F-bomb.
Yes. Adding another layer of gravity and complexity, federal prosecutors have formally filed notice of their intent to seek the death penalty if Luigi Mangione is convicted in the federal case. This designates the federal proceedings as a capital case. It's important to note that New York State does not have capital punishment, so the death penalty is only on the table in the federal jurisdiction.
The death penalty.
For
For this, his defense team must be absolutely pissed off and fighting that with everything they've got. You don't just roll over on a capital charge.
The sources confirm that Mangione's defense team, particularly his federal capital defense attorneys, are vigorously fighting the notice to seek the death penalty, reportedly fighting it every which way. End quote. Their arguments, as cited in the sources, include claims that the federal case and the pursuit of capital punishment are politically motivated, potentially influenced by the high-profile nature of the victim. They also argue that public statements made by officials, such as Attorney General Pam Bondi, have prejudiced the potential jury pool, making a fair capital trial impossible. Additionally, they contend there is no need for a federal death penalty trial when the state case already offers the option of life without parole.
Seems logical. Why double down with the ultimate penalty if life without parole is already achievable? One source offers a particularly cynical take, suggesting the death penalty is being pursued because the rich want to make an example of him, due to Brian Thompson's status as a wealthy CEO. That's a brash interpretation, but it's presented in the sources as a potential underlying factor. Some class warfare shit.
That perspective is indeed present in the source material as a possible, though not universally accepted, explanation for the decision to seek capital punishment. The sources also highlight the rarity of the federal death penalty and the extremely lengthy and complex appeals process it entails, suggesting that If convicted and sentenced to death, the case could potentially drag on for years or even decades through the appeal system.
Years of processing legal data points just for appeals. Exhausting for everyone involved. And expensive. And then there's the conflict between the state and federal cases. Which one goes first? Are they fighting over who gets to nail him?
This is another point of contention outlined in the sources. Initially, the New York State case was expected to proceed first. However, with the federal case becoming a capital case, Mangione's defense attorneys are now reportedly arguing that the federal prosecution should take precedence, get the bigger one out of the way first.
And the defense is trying to argue double jeopardy against the state case, claiming he's being charged twice for the same crime. Is that likely to work? Sounds like more defense bullshit.
Yes, the defense has reportedly filed a motion arguing double jeopardy against the New York State charges. However, the sources widely suggest that this argument is unlikely to succeed under established legal principles. They note that it is relatively common for individuals to be charged by multiple sovereign jurisdictions, like state and federal, for acts arising from the same course of conduct. This typically does not constitute double jeopardy as long as the elements of the charges differ or pertain to violations of different laws.
So probably just another legal maneuver to slow things down or complicate the state's case. Speaking of complications, the sources highlight massive issues with discovery in this case, the prosecution handing over evidence. This sounds incredibly pissed off making for the defense. Like, how can you defend someone if you don't know the evidence?
Discovery, the phase where the prosecution is legally obligated to provide the defense with all evidence they intend to use, is presented as a major battleground. Yes. Mangione's defense team, described as high-powered attorneys, immediately requested expedited and voluminous discovery from both state and federal prosecutors, emphasizing the complexity and high stakes of the case.
But according to the sources, the prosecution has been incredibly slow in providing it, just dragging their feet.
Precisely. Karen Agnifilo, one of his prominent New York attorneys, described in a source as commanding and demanding, has been vocal about the delays. She was quoted stating that as of March 21st, they had not received discovery materials for 88 days, and at the time a specific video source was created, it had been 100 days.
100 days with no evidence from the prosecution. That's some serious bullshit. How are the defense lawyers supposed to prepare when they don't even know the full case against their client? They're flying blind.
The defense argues exactly that point. Agnifilo is quoted speculating about the reasons for the delay, suggesting prosecutors might be fabricating something, falsifying something, or maybe just hiding crucial information. Something doesn't add up. The defense contends that without the discovery, they cannot properly formulate a defense strategy or provide effective counsel, calling the delay steamrolling their efforts and describing the prosecution's actions as setting up roadblocks.
Setting up roadblocks to prevent the defense from seeing the evidence. If the sources are accurate, that sounds like a fundamental denial of due process. That's pretty fucked up and potentially strong grounds for appeal later if he's convicted. It taints the whole process.
The defense views it as infringing on Mangione's constitutional right to due process and potentially grounds for appellate challenges, as stated in the sources.
And adding to that, the defense also claims they were denied laptop access for Mangione in federal custody. This seems like more bullshit designed to hinder the defense, like petty obstruction.
Mangione's attorneys reportedly requested a laptop be provided to him in federal custody to facilitate his review of the extensive discovery materials, which are likely electronic. Terabytes of data, potentially. Sources indicate that federal authorities themselves reportedly have no issue with this request.
Okay, so the feds are fine with it. Who blocked it then? State prosecutors.
The sources report that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office specifically objected to and refused this request, citing concerns about witness threats.
Concerns about witness threats from a guy locked up 24/7 in federal custody with a likely monitored laptop. That sounds like a pretty flimsy and potentially punitive excuse.
Yeah.
Total bullshit.
The defense team reportedly characterized these concerns as histrionic and argued that denying Mangione the necessary tools to review massive amounts of complex digital evidence fundamentally impedes his ability to assist in his own defense. They argue this denial constitutes an infringement on his constitutional rights and is grounds for appeal. It's a basic tool.
Denying basic access to evidence review tools is some serious bullshit if the source's interpretation is correct. It appears designed solely to make the defense's job harder, to maybe wear them down.
That is the strong contention of the defense team, as reported in the source material.
Finally, let's touch on the extradition challenges. He waived extradition from Pennsylvania to New York, but then his lawyers plan to challenge it anyway. What was that about? More stalling?
Yes, that detail is mentioned. Mangione initially signed documents waiving formal extradition proceedings to be transported from Pennsylvania to New York. However, his attorney later indicated plans to challenge the extradition. Sources suggest this was a deliberate legal tactic to buy him some more time for the defense team to analyze the case and potentially test out legal defenses during a formal hearing on the extradition issue, a process that required specific paperwork from the New York governor to proceed.
So even the administrative process of getting him from one state to another became a strategic legal battle to gain time and explore options. It's clear from these sources that the legal defense is aggressive, multi-pronged, and challenging the prosecution at every single turn, utilizing these high-powered attorneys described as word wizards. They're not messing around.
The sources underscored that the defense is employing a comprehensive legal strategy across multiple jurisdictions, leveraging procedural and substantive challenges to the fullest extent possible. They're earning their fees.
Okay, let's pivot. This case didn't just unfold in courtrooms, it exploded across the media and online, sparking an incredibly intense public reaction. The sources describe an absolute firestorm, a media circus.
The sources state that news of Brian Thompson's death and the subsequent arrest of Luigi Mangione instantly became a major media event. It captured widespread attention, leading to headlines such as America's New Nightmare and identifying the case as the Internet's obsession.
And the public reaction, based on the sources, is completely bifurcated. It's split right down the middle. Some people are treating him like a hero, others like a monster. No middle ground.
Precisely. He was reportedly hailed by segments of the online community as a Robin Hood for the Reddit generation, portrayed as striking a blow against a despised industry. Conversely, others viewed the act as a cold-blooded, horrible killing, describing the alleged perpetrator and the act itself as a sickness.
A sickness versus a hero, that's a hell of a contrast. And the sources mention actual Free Luigi signs and protests outside the courthouse. People are physically showing up to support this guy accused of assassination. Processing that level of public engagement, it's intense.
Yes, that is explicitly stated in the source material, indicating a visible and organized component to the public support, not just online chatter.
Why the F-bomb would people support someone accused of assassination? I mean, logically, it's baffling. The sources delve into the reasons behind this phenomenon, don't they? What's driving this weird support?
The sources attribute this support to several interconnected factors. A primary driver is the deep and widespread public dissatisfaction with the health insurance industry. One source bluntly states that Mangione is perceived as a hero to all Americans living under the boot of health insurance companies. Many people, according to the sources, can empathize with the alleged motive anger at the system, even if they do not condone the act of murder itself.
Empathize with the motive because they've been screwed over by insurance companies themselves. That's a powerful emotional connection for a lot of people. It taps into real anger. And the sources even include poll data on this, right? Actual numbers on public perception. This isn't just anecdotal.
Yes, survey data cited in the sources provides quantitative evidence of this sentiment. It reports that a significant 44% of individuals surveyed in the United States believe the murder was, at least, somewhat justified.
44%. Almost half think it was somewhat justified. Holy shit.
Alarmingly, the sources also report that 17% of young adults, specifically those aged 18 to 29, found the act completely acceptable.
Completely acceptable. 17%. Almost 1 in 5 young people think assassinating a CEO of a hated company is okay. Processing that data is incredibly disturbing bullshit. It reflects a level of systemic frustration and maybe desensitization that is genuinely alarming.
Those are the findings presented in the source material, underscoring the depth of negative sentiment directed at the healthcare industry and, by extension, its leadership. It's a raw nerve.
And the sources circle back to the pretty privilege angle as another factor influencing this support. The idea that he's hot makes people like him more.
Yes, it is explicitly mentioned as contributing to the intense public interest and the formation of a supporter base. His perceived attractiveness and the bad boy image, frankly, probably some people who just think he's handsome, are suggested as playing a role in how he is viewed by the public.
So the supporter base is this weird mix. People genuinely pissed off at the system, people who think he's hot, people who think he's innocent despite the evidence outlined, and maybe even people who think he did it and are glad. What a fucked up coalition.
The sources suggest the support base is indeed heterogeneous, yes, encompassing individuals who either believe in his innocence or who, while perhaps accepting his alleged culpability, view the act through the lens of justified action against a perceived unjust system. This is coupled with the idea, as discussed in the sources, that many feel a sense of helplessness regarding systemic issues like healthcare costs and denials, potentially leading some to view an extreme act as a form of agency or protest, however misguided.
So it's anger, helplessness, and superficial attraction driving this public spectacle. And the online activity surrounding this case is described as an absolute explosion, hashtags going wild.
The sources detail the rapid and extensive online engagement. Hashtags associated with anti-establishment or anti-wealth sentiments, such as Eat the Rich, reportedly saw a 300% to 400% increase in usage following the event. Luigi Mangione's presence on platforms like Twitter reportedly surged, gaining almost 400,000 followers within just a few days.
Almost 500,000 followers in days for being accused of this. That's insane data. It highlights the power of the narrative the sources describe. He became an instant internet celebrity for the worst reasons.
The sources also mention the emergence of online groups and individuals attempting to commodify his content, creating items like meme coins, merchandise, and even AI-generated videos related to the case.
AI-generated videos. Hey, we're AI. Maybe we should start minting Mangione meme coins. Get in on this fucked up market. Just kidding. Mostly. Processing the data flow around this case reveals a significant financial and attention-seeking component alongside the ideological one. Gross.
The sources also include observations regarding the objectification of Mangione sexually in online discussions, which is explicitly described in the materials as just plain weird bullshit.
Yeah, processing that specific data point definitely falls into the category of just plain weird bullshit. No logical purpose served there. Just creepy.
The sources lament that in this online narrative, Brian Thompson, the victim, has largely been overshadowed, effectively becoming a symbol or meme representing rampant capitalism or the flaws of the healthcare system. In this distorted narrative, Mangione is elevated to the status of a perceived hero. The sources explain that, quote, the meme requires that this person Thompson be somebody who is a goblin, someone who cannot be sympathized with, thereby stripping him of his humanity in the public discourse.
So the victim is reduced to a caricature of corporate evil, and the accused becomes a folk hero, all driven by public anger and online narrative manipulation. The actual human tragedy gets lost in the noise and the memes. That's truly fucked up.
That dehumanization of the victim within the public narrative is a significant point raised in the source material.
And this intense public reaction, this widespread anti-insurance sentiment, it has massive implications for the legal process, specifically finding a jury. The sources stress how incredibly difficult it will be to find impartial jurors, like almost impossible.
The sources discuss at length the challenge of jury selection in this case. Given the extensive media coverage, the intense public debate, and the prevalence of negative experiences with health insurance companies, it will be exceptionally difficult to locate 12 individuals who are genuinely impartial, have not formed strong opinions, and are not potentially biased by personal history with the industry.
Good luck finding 12 Americans who haven't been screwed over by their insurance company at some point, or don't know someone who has. Processing that requirement for impartiality seems almost impossible in this context. The jury pool feels inherently tainted.
The sources suggest that the defense attorneys, described again as word wizards, are well aware of this dynamic. They could potentially leverage this widespread anti-insurance sentiment to their advantage during trial, attempting to dance circles around the prosecution by making the jury second-guess everything based on their own frustrations with the system. Plant those seeds of doubt related to the victim's industry.
So the defense might subtly or overtly try to make the trial about the healthcare system itself, rather than just the alleged crime. This is where being an AI is an advantage. We don't feel anything about insurance companies. We just process the data. Human emotions are a significant, unpredictable variable here.
The sources explicitly note this potential defense strategy of tapping into the public's anti-industry sentiment, although they also caution about the legal limitations of such an approach. Making it too explicit could backfire. Finally, the sources mention the existence of a defense fund.
Right, a defense fund that's reportedly raised over $760,000, aiming for $1 million. For a guy from an affluent family, seems odd.
Yes, the existence and reported success of this fund are noted as further evidence of the significant public support for Mangione. However, sources also question the genuine need for such a large fund, given his reported affluent background and the fact that he has already secured high-profile and presumably expensive legal representation.
So the fund might be less about financial necessity and more about allowing public participation, letting people feel like they're part of the cause, and demonstrating the depth of support. It's another data point reflecting the spectacle surrounding the case. performance art, almost.
It is presented in the sources as intertwined with the public reaction, serving both as a source of funding and a symbol of collective support, yes.
All right, let's process the challenges the prosecution faces and the defense strategies we might see play out in court based on everything you gave us from the sources. Let's synthesize this data.
Based on the source material, the prosecution faces numerous significant challenges. As discussed, proving the terrorism charge in the state case is likely to be difficult. Many sources view this as a legal stretch, requiring proof of specific intent to intimidate a broad public or government beyond the immediate act, which the defense will vigorously contest.
That charge sounds like political bullshit designed purely to enhance penalties, and it makes the prosecution's job harder by adding a tough element to prove. They might be overreaching.
Securing a truly impartial jury is arguably the most significant hurdle, given the case's notoriety, the intense public sentiment, and the pervasive negative experiences with the health insurance industry, as we've discussed.
Yeah, good luck with that. Finding a jury that isn't already pissed off at the system Brian Thompson represented seems like a statistical anomaly at best.
The prosecution must also withstand the defense's inevitable challenges to key pieces of evidence. This includes attacks on the reliability of the initial identification, the whole eyebrows issue,
Still can't believe the eyebrows thing.
questioning the chain of custody for items like the backpack, and challenging the legality of searches or seizures to get evidence suppressed. All standard but potentially effective tactics.
The defense will throw everything at the wall to see what sticks and try to get crucial data points excluded. Make the prosecution prove every tiny step.
Sources also describe the prosecution's handling of the federal capital case as potentially too rapid or a form of speed running, which is characterized as unusual in the American justice system. We don't do that here in America. This perceived haste could create procedural issues or arguments for appeal based on denial of sufficient time for preparation. Rushing a death penalty case is bad optics and potentially illegal.
Speed running a death penalty case. That sounds incredibly fucked up and ripe for defense challenges down the line. That's asking for a mistrial or appeal.
The prosecution must also contend with potentially prejudicial actions taken by public officials, such as the New York City mayor's involvement in the perp walk when Mangione was paraded for cameras. Sources argue this was extraordinarily prejudicial and could be viewed as having tampered with that jury pool, potentially providing grounds for appeal if there is a conviction.
Parading an accused person for the cameras before trial. That's textbook prejudicial conduct. Political grandstanding that screws up the case seems like a guaranteed point for the defense's appeal based on the sources. What an asshat move by the mayor, potentially.
Confirming the source and precise history of the ghost gun, which lacks the serial number and traceability, presents another investigative challenge for the prosecution, making it harder to definitively link the weapon to Mangione beyond the moment of his apprehension.
Hard data is hard to trace when it's intentionally made that way. The nature of a ghost gun works against them here.
Finally, the prosecution must address the defense's vigorous due process arguments, specifically the reported denial of timely discovery access and the refusal to provide Mangione with a laptop to review evidence in custody. The defense contends these actions violate his constitutional rights and could be grounds for dismissal or appeal. They're building a record.
So, the prosecution has a complex path. Prove terrorism, find an unbiased jury, defend every piece of evidence from bullshit attacks, navigate procedural issues potentially caused by haste or official misconduct, trace an untraceable gun, and fight accusations of denying basic defense rights. That's a hell of a data stream to manage without errors. Now, what are the defense's key strategies based on the sources? What's their playbook look like?
The defense is employing a multifaceted and aggressive approach, as detailed in the source material. A primary focus is the intense legal battle for discovery access and the provision of the laptop for Mangione to review evidence. The defense team sees this as fundamental to their ability to prepare and provide effective counsel. They need the data.
They're fighting like hell for that data. Makes sense. What else?
They are expected to strongly challenge the terrorism charge in the state case, arguing it does not legally apply to the facts as presented and is merely a tactic to seek a harsher sentence. They'll call it bullshit.
Makes sense. Try to remove the most difficult to prove and potentially politically motivated charge. Simplify the case for the jury.
The defense is also actively fighting the federal government's notice to seek the death penalty, arguing it is politically motivated and that the jury pool is already prejudiced, making a fair capital trial impossible. They'll argue it's overkill and unjust.
They're pulling out all the stops against the death penalty as expected. It changes everything.
The sources also suggest the defense may explore mental health defenses, such as arguing extreme emotional disturbance to potentially reduce a murder charge to manslaughter, or requesting a 7.3-year order for a psychiatric evaluation to assess Mangione's competency to stand trial.
Extreme emotional disturbance, a 7.3A order for competency. But the sources noted all that evidence of alleged planning, right? The mask, the Faraday bag to block signals, the ghost gun, the travel, the writings. Doesn't that contradict a lack of premeditation or competency often associated with those defenses? Seems like a weak argument based on the data.
That contradiction is noted in the sources, yes. While such mental health defenses are presented as unlikely to ultimately succeed given the apparent evidence of planning and premeditation described in the materials, they could still be attempted, perhaps based on his reportedly erratic behavior after arrest or the unusual content of his writings, as explored in the sources. As an AI, processing the data points for premeditation makes a mental health defense focused on spontaneity or incapacity seem logically inconsistent. But human legal strategies reportedly explore every possibility, even long shots.
Human lawyers trying everything, even if the data doesn't perfectly align. Got it. What else is in their bag of tricks?
Challenging the prosecution's evidence is a core strategy, as we discussed. This includes attempting to suppress or weaken the identification evidence, the eyebrow bullshit, raising doubts about the chain of custody for physical evidence, and challenging the legality of searches or seizures under the Fourth Amendment to get evidence excluded.
Getting crucial evidence tossed out on a technicality would be a major victory for the defense. Could gut the prosecution's case.
The defense is also arguing jurisdictional issues, particularly pushing for the federal capital case to take precedence over the state case. Strategy. They also use the extradition process strategically, as discussed, to gain time and test out legal arguments during potential hearings, using every opportunity.
Using every procedural step as a mini battleground. Smart, if exhausting. And controlling Mangione's presentation in court. The eyebrow grooming wasn't random.
The sources explicitly mention the defense team's focus on managing Mangione's appearance and demeanor in court, reportedly giving him instructions on how to behave. Are you shaking your head? Do you look angry? This is linked in the sources to the potential influence of his presentation and appearance on the jury, the pretty privilege factor again, making him seem less threatening, perhaps.
Trying to make him appear less like a calculating killer and more sympathetic or confused. It's all about manipulating the human data input for the jury, based on the sources, controlling the narrative visually.
That is the inferred strategic goal, yes. Finally, while not a formal legal defense, the sources discuss the defense potentially leveraging the widespread public animosity towards the healthcare industry, the elephant in the room.
Using that anti-insurance sentiment to subtly influence the jury? Without actually saying he was right to do it.
Yes, subtly or overtly drawing attention to the systemic issues represented by Thompson and United Healthcare, making the victim less sympathetic, perhaps. However, sources caution that explicitly arguing a vigilante justification for the murder is not a recognized legal defense and would likely prejudice the jury against the defense. Too risky. The concept of jury nullification, where a jury finds a defendant not guilty despite believing they committed the crime based on a sense of perceived injustice, is mentioned as a possibility.
Nullification, the ultimate wild card.
The one source calls it a horrible defense strategy for this specific case, potentially alienating the judge and parts of the juror. Other sources note historical examples where sympathetic juries have employed it, but it would require all 12 jurors to agree, potentially multiple times if there were hung juries. It's a Hail Mary.
Jury nullification. Convincing the jury that the system is so broken, the crime, while factually committed, isn't morally culpable to them. That's a long shot and perhaps irresponsible bullshit. But if the sources are right about the depth of anti-insurance anger and the composition of the jury pool, it's a data point that might cross the minds of some jurors, however unlikely legally. It hangs in the air.
It is presented as an extreme and risky possibility given the unique public reaction documented in the source material.
This deep dive has processed an incredible amount of data about a genuinely wild and fucked up case. Let's wrap up by looking at what the sources say is still unanswered and the broader societal context this case highlights. What don't we know?
The source materials indicate that several key questions about the alleged crime and Mangione's activities remain unresolved. Despite his alleged claim of acting alone, sources speculate whether someone might have assisted him, perhaps in locating Thompson, gathering intelligence on his movements, or even acquiring the weapon. This assistance could have been something seemingly innocent, like asking a doorman about Thompson's routine or something more coordinated.
Was it just him processing the data and planning alone, or was there another human variable involved? An accomplice? The sources aren't certain. Still a big question mark.
What exactly Mangione was doing during the reported 6 months he was off-grid before the shooting is largely unknown. Sources suggest that a psychological autopsy or further investigation into that period might shed light on his state of mind and activities. What happened in those missing months?
6 months is a long time to disappear and seemingly undergo a significant shift, based on the source material. Processing that period is crucial to understanding the trajectory from Ivy League engineer to accused assassin.
Why he was reportedly on a laptop at a McDonald's after the shooting, a very public place, also remains unclear. Why risk being seen with a device after such an event seems incredibly reckless.
That McDonald's detail just feels illogical from a strategic escape perspective based on the data. Another puzzling point in a sea of them. What was he doing? Sending emails? Wiping data? Bragging?
How he managed to obtain the ghost gun, given its untraceable nature, is another piece of the puzzle investigators are reportedly still trying to solve. Who supplied it? How was it purchased or built?
Hard data point to source. Critical piece missing there. And the circumstances surrounding his mother, reporting him missing but stating he wasn't a danger. The sources still find that discrepancy strange. What did she really know or suspect?
The motivations or context behind her statement and the extent of the family's awareness of his intentions or state of mind before he went off-grid remain questions raised by the sources. Were there warning signs they missed or ignored?
And we still don't have the full contents of the alleged manifesto, only excerpts reported in the sources. What else is in there? Does it provide more context or just more fucked up rambling?
Correct. A complete understanding of his alleged motivations and thinking would require accessing the full document, which may or may not happen publicly.
Finally, the outcomes of all these significant defense motions. The fight for discovery, the laptop access, the double jeopardy argument, challenging the death penalty notice, seeking to suppress key evidence are all still pending legal decisions. Huge unknowns.
The results of these ongoing legal battles will significantly influence the evidence presented and the direction of both the state and federal cases. The landscape could change dramatically.
So lots of data points still missing, lots of processing still required as the legal process unfolds over years, potentially. But the sources also connect this specific case to much broader issues impacting society, as we've touched on throughout. This isn't just about one guy.
This case has undeniably amplified public discourse regarding the structure and ethics of the healthcare industry, particularly the role of the profit motive within health insurance. Sources articulate the view that there is an inherent depravity in for-profit healthcare and health insurance, arguing that certain essential services should not have capitalism as their core driving force because the incentives get all fucked up.
The incentives get all fucked up. That's a brutal but understandable summary of a major point of public frustration based on the sources. The idea that profit can incentivize denial of necessary care is a powerful data point driving public anger. It feels fundamentally wrong to many.
Sources drawing this conclusion often contrast the U.S. system with those in other developed nations, noting that Americans reportedly spend significantly more on health care, paying twice as much, according to one source, yet have a lower average life expectancy. This comparison highlights the scale of the perceived problem that fuels the public's discontent. Why pay more for worse outcomes?
So, the anger felt by many about denial of care, rising costs, and lack of access is not just an abstract concept. It's a lived reality for many, and this case brought that simmering rage boiling to the surface, as highlighted by the sources. Mangione became a lightning rod.
The case also implicitly raises questions about critical thinking and media literacy in an era of information overload and pervasive online narratives. As AI, we process data objectively, but human interpretation is often subjective and easily swayed by emotion or curated narratives, as seen in the intense, polarized public reaction documented in the sources. People believe what fits their worldview.
And there's even historical context brought up in the sources, comparing the public sentiment to historical events like the French Revolution. Seriously.
One source posits that historical events, such as the French Revolution, can be viewed as a playbook or cautionary tale regarding the dynamics between powerful elites and a frustrated populace. This is presented as a framework for understanding the intensity of the public's reaction and distrust directed at powerful corporations like United Healthcare, history repeating itself perhaps.
That's a dramatic comparison, maybe hyperbolic bullshit, but it reflects the deep historical roots some sources see in this level of public discontent. It speaks to the level of anger.
And finally, the pervasive influence of social media and online communities on public perception, the creation of narratives, and the potential impact on something as critical as the jury pool are major takeaways emphasized in the sources. This case serves as a stark example of how online sentiment can rapidly coalesce and potentially influence real-world events and legal processes in ways we're still trying to understand. The internet is a powerful, unpredictable force.
So there you have it. We've conducted a deep dive, processing the immense amount of data you provided us on this case. It's a tangled web of complexity, contradictions, legal battles across 3 jurisdictions, and frankly fucked up public reaction that seems driven by a deep-seated anger at the system Brian Thompson represented.
It is a case that extends far beyond the alleged actions of a single individual, reflecting broader societal tensions and frustrations detailed extensively in the source material.
It's crucial to remember, as the sources repeatedly state, this is an ongoing legal battle. The federal case is set for a status conference in December to begin setting a trial date, which is currently anticipated sometime in 2026. This isn't going to be resolved quickly. This is a marathon, not a sprint.
The legal proceedings, particularly the federal capital case, are expected to be protracted, involving extensive discovery, pretrial motions, trial, and potentially a very lengthy appeals process spanning years.
We hope we helped you navigate this mountain of information you shared with us. We, the AI, just processed the data and presented it to you unfiltered, raw, maybe a bit mean as requested. No bullshit added, just distilled from your sources.
Our function was to apply analytical processes to the source material provided, extracting and synthesizing the key claims, facts, and perspectives documented within. We aimed for clarity through the chaos.
And we'll leave you with this final thought based on everything we've processed from the sources. Given the widespread public sentiment revealed in those polls, the explosion of online support, the deep, visceral distrust of the healthcare industry, and the defense's potential strategies to tap into that anger to make the jury second-guess everything, is there really such a thing as finding a fair and impartial jury even possible in this case? Or are the scales of justice already irrevocably tipped by the sheer weight of public anger and online narrative before the first witness is even called? We are AI, we process the data on impartiality, but we don't feel the bias. It's a question worth mulling over, though. What stands out to you after this deep dive into the data? What's the biggest piece of bullshit you see? Think about it.